Hello, everyone. Let's continue our conversation on the skeletal muscle system. Now, we are going to define here a number of terms associated with muscle contraction. The first step is going to be to define a motor unit. What is a motor unit? A motor unit, it's basically a unit that is controlled by one nerve fiber. So one nerve fiber is going to control the contraction of a number of muscle cells. All right? So that represents a motor unit. So you can have motor unit 1, motor unit 2, motor unit 3, and so on and so forth. Right? Then we have another term, the muscle twitch. What is a muscle twitch? A muscle twitch, it's basically a single contraction, right? Lasting about a fraction of a second. So you have a stimulus that comes in, and that stimulus is going to cause the shortening of a muscle fiber. That's a muscle twitch, right? Then you have a muscle summation. A muscle summation, it's basically an increase in muscle contraction until you reach a maximum contraction that is sustained, right? Now, a contraction that is sustained, it's actually called tetanus, okay? Tetanus, it's a contraction that is sustained. And then we have another term, it's muscle tone. A muscle tone, it's basically a continuous partial contraction of a muscle, right? Typically, when we exercise on a regular basis, our muscle build strength, right? Eventually, our muscles are going to be in a state where they are somewhat partially contracted, even when we are not exercising, right? And this is due to the muscle tone, right? Now, when a muscle undergo atrophy because we were in bed for a month for being sick, for instance, right? Well, we are going to lose muscle tone, right? To regain that muscle tone, we will have to resume exercising again, right? Now, we use, for instance, Botox, which is actually a toxin. You know, that toxin is actually a mild toxin that is used in cosmetology to actually partially contract the muscles of the face so that, a person doesn't look old, right? You know that the skin actually becomes very soft as we grow old, but by injecting Botox, this is going to cause a partial contraction of the muscles of the frontalis and causing basically the face to look smooth. All right, so here we have a muscle contraction, and that muscle contraction is triggered by a stimulus. So when a stimulus comes in, you have a period during which you don't see any contraction. Okay? That time you don't see any contraction, it's actually the latent period. That latent period is the moment between the release of the neurotransmitter, the attachment of the neurotransmitter on the neurotransmitter receptor. Then you are going to have the transduction of the signal inside of the muscle cell, and that transduction of the signal is going to lead to the release of calcium. calcium attaches to troponin, and so on and so forth, before you can actually see contraction itself. That's the latent period. Then you have muscle contraction, which is a twitch here, and then you are going to have a relaxation. Notice that muscle contraction happens in a relatively short period of time, while muscle relaxation is going to take much longer. All right? So now, to really, when we exercise, we don't just send one stimulus, we send multiple stimuli, right? So we have one stimulus right here, another one right here, another one right here, another one right here, so that the stimuli come faster and faster, closer and closer. And as this happens, more and more units of muscles are going to be contracted, right? And the more units are contracted, the more intensity we see, right? So we have a summation that happens here because you have basically a compilation of all the contraction units that are happening, so that you reach a point where there is a maximum contraction. So at that point, all the motor units for a given muscle have been contracted, okay? And you cannot contract further, right? This is a tetanus. And when you reach tetanus, the only thing that can happen after that, it's muscle fatigue, okay? And when you reach muscle fatigue, there is a point in time when even if you bring a stimulus, that stimulus is not doing anything to the muscle, right? Because the muscle is going to be unresponsive, right? That's another story of the physiology. All right. So whenever there is muscle contraction, the cell needs energy. That energy, it's going to come from two sources. One, it's the muscle. Two, it's the blood. Now, the first energy that is used, it's obviously the energy that is inside the muscle cell. And energy is inside of the muscle cells in two forms: glycogen and fat. The glycogen, it's basically a macromolecule that is built out of glucose molecules attached to each other. So the cell, the muscle cell, is going to pluck off one glucose molecule out of glycogen, do cellular respiration, and extract ATP from that molecule. And that ATP is going to be used for muscle contraction. Now, one is going to assume that during exercise, right, when we consider the energy that is used, as we start exercising, what is the energy that is used the most? The energy that is used the most, it's going to be the muscle glycogen. That is the energy that is used the most. Then, what is the other energy that is going to be used? We're going to have the muscle triglycerides, the muscle fat, right? Right here. And we are going to have the plasma fatty acids. Notice that the blood glucose is used in very small amount. But as we exercise over time, the more we exercise, the more glucose from the blood we are going to use. That's over a long period of time. We are talking 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours of exercise, right? Now, let's take a look at the pattern of use of the, the muscle energy. The muscle energy that is going to be first almost depleted, it's going to be the muscle glycogen. So as we exercise, we are using up glycogen like crazy. That glycogen is the glycogen that is in the muscles. Makes sense? It's the source of energy that is right there, right? So that's for the plasma, I'm sorry, the muscle glycogen. Now, how about the muscle triglyceride? The muscle triglyceride are also going to be used progressively, right? But not as drastically as the muscle glycogen, right? Nevertheless, muscle fat are going to be used also in a manner that is consistent with the location of the source of energy. All right? But now, as we focus on what is happening in the blood, we notice that as we exercise, and that as time goes and we keep exercising, we are using more and more of the sugar that is in the blood. That's one. Two, we are also using more and more of the lipids that are in the blood. Okay? Which is that really when we exercise, you see that we are depleting the fat that is in our muscles, and we are also depleting the fat that is in the blood, which actually causes us to lose weight with exercise. But notice that it takes a good amount of exercise to tremendously use the fat that is both in the blood and in the muscle. It takes time. Okay? It takes time. So notice here how much we are using the fat that is in the plasma after 3 hours worth of exercise. So right now we are burning fat and burning fat and burning fat, right? So which means that 30 minutes of exercise, it's almost nothing to lose a bunch of fat, right? You need to exercise for a good solid hour and more. Anyway, let's move on. All right. So, what are the source of ATP in our muscles? Now, we talked about glycogen, we talked about the fat. At the end of the day, though, all of that has to be converted into ATP. Now, here is the thing. We never store many seconds at a time worth of ATP in terms of work. Okay? We don't store a bunch of ATP to exercise, for instance, for 2 minutes. No, that is not going to happen, right? Yet you need ATP all the time. So the question is, how is the body managing to actually have ATP on a regular basis? You have two different approaches. One is to say, well, I'm just going to produce ATP all the time, okay, through cellular respiration, which actually is not reasonable because cellular respiration, it's a process. Okay? Cellular respiration, it's a process. Now, because it takes time to obtain ATP through cellular respiration, the body is not going to mainly rely on that. Well, what the body is going to do, it's rather than storing ATP as ATP, the body is going to store ATP as creatine phosphate. So creatine, it's a protein that is phosphorylated. Okay? Now that creatine that is phosphorylated is abundant in the muscles. And as creatine is phosphorylated, it's actually keeping the phosphate that is filled with energy and readily make that phosphate available as needed. But here is how this thing goes. So creatine phosphate, right, is going to transfer a phosphate group to ADP so that ADP becomes ATP. And in the process, creatine phosphate, that was creatine phosphate, is now going to become creatine, just simple creatine. Okay? So that is the mechanism by which really we store ATP in our system, right? All right. So creatine phosphate is the fastest way to make energy available for muscle contraction. Otherwise, we are going to rely extensively on fermentation, right? Fermentation is very reliable and good because fermentation doesn't require presence of oxygen. Fermentation happens in the cytoplasm, right? In the sarcoplasm, if you will. Okay, so that fermentation, which is a partial breakdown of sugar, is going to produce ATP on a regular basis. But the downside, it's that you're going to have a buildup of lactic acid or lactate. Okay, that is a problem. Okay, so that even though fermentation sounds like a good idea, but for a long run, you don't want that, right? That's why the cell is going to do mainly cellular respiration, which actually takes time, but it is what it is. And cellular respiration is going to be used mainly to sustain activity over a long period of time. Okay? Now, for instance, when you think about a marathoner, right? A marathoner is going to run for hours, right? So this guy is going to need bits of ATP at a time. And we are going to see that there is a difference between those who are running marathons and those who are actually running track field, right? So now, acquiring ATP, basically you have creatine phosphate that is going to give a phosphate to ADP. By giving a phosphate to ADP, ADP becomes ATP. Woo-hoo. So that's good. We have production of ATP and creatine phosphate becomes creatine, right? During anaerobic condition, creatine is going to be a good source of ATP, okay? During anaerobic respiration as well, so fermentation, during fermentation, we are going to have ATP that is going to be produced through anaerobic processes, okay? And then through cellular respiration, we are going to have ATP that can also be produced. So 3 sources of ATP, all right, in the body. So now, let's contrast fast twitch muscle and slow twitch muscle. Track field runners and marathon runners. Someone who is lifting weight and someone who is running marathon. What difference? Well, there are two types of muscle fibers: fast twitch fibers and slow twitch fibers. The fast twitch fibers are white, kind of white muscles. Okay, these are the fast twitch fibers. Why are they white? I'm going to explain that in a minute. And the slow twitch fibers are dark fibers. Why are they dark? I'm going to explain that in a minute. So, now, the fast twitch fibers are these fibers that work very well in anaerobic condition. Okay? It works very well in an anaerobic condition because they rely a lot on fermentation and creatine phosphate. Okay? Now, this has the advantage to release energy like this very quick, right? But the downside, it's that ATP that is released quick, it's also going to vanish very quick, all right? So that this type of athlete are going to experience very quickly muscle fatigue. Now, you notice that the track field runners are actually not running many hours worth of, run, right? They're going to run 100 meter in a relatively short period of time, and that's it. Okay? Someone who is actually doing competition for lifting weights can lift only for so long, right? They are limited, but they are very strong and they can just do something really quick, okay? Now, there are a number of factors that come into play here. This muscle fibers are white because you have a low amount of a protein called myoglobin. Myoglobin, the amount of myoglobin is low, okay? And the myoglobins are also the molecules that carry oxygen, right? Remember that. The amount of mitochondria is reduced. The amount of mitochondria is reduced, okay? So myoglobin is dark, mitochondria dark. So when you have a low amount of myoglobins and a low amount of mitochondria, your muscle fibers are going to look clear like this, okay? That's the fast twitch muscles. Fast, they use their energy fast and they fatigue fast, okay? The slow twitch, they are going to rely on aerobic cellular respiration for energy production, has a steady power, has endurance, so you can run for hours, right? Okay, now why are they dark? They are dark because they contain a bunch of myoglobin and they contain a bunch of mitochondria. Bunch of mitochondria means cellular respiration is happening in the cells big time, right? Myoglobin carry oxygen. A lot of myoglobin means a lot of oxygen is going to be present in the cells. So you understand, the advantages here. All right. The fast twitch fibers are going to rely on creatine phosphate and fermentation, right? These are mainly anaerobic processes, right? They're going to be adapted. The fast twitch fibers, they're going to be adapted for strength, like lifting weight, right? They're going to be light in color. They're going to have only few mitochondria, little to no myoglobin, and fewer blood vessels than slow twitch. Now, how about slow twitch? They're going to rely on aerobic cellular respiration. They're going to be adapted for endurance. They're going to be dark because of the mitochondria and the myoglobin, right? Okay? Many mitochondria, many myoglobins, many blood vessels, okay? So that's what you need to know here. Now, what is the importance of exercising? Exercising actually plays a very important role in our overall health. It helps with muscle strength, with endurance, with flexibility. It increases cardiorespiratory endurance, right? It helps with the health of the heart muscle, right? Because we are going to have a high density lipoprotein proportion in our blood compared to low density lipoproteins, okay? And the proportion of proteins to fat is also going to be increased. So you're going to have more proteins than you do have fat as you exercise. Now, exercise is also going to be very important in fighting some or preventing some infections. I mean, some infection. No, that's not what I wanted to say. Some cancers, okay, including colon cancer, breast cancer, cervical cancer, uterine cancer, and ovarian cancer. Exercising is going to be good for improving the health of the bones, right? With bone density, right? Decrease the likelihood to develop osteoporosis. And also, as we exercise, we're going to release dopamine, right? Which means that this is going to be good for your mood, okay? And avoid depression, right? So exercising is important and varies as we age. Children need a lot of exercise. They have a bunch of energy. They don't need to be structured necessarily, but they are going to need a bunch of exercise. That's why, when you have an 8 years old boy like myself, sometimes we are in the house and he's in the house and he's like, Daddy, I'm bored. I need to do something, right? And this is when you are like, okay, I'm glad it's getting better outside. So why don't you go in the backyard and enjoy yourself and run around? And I'll tell you, when I ask him to go to the backyard, he goes there and he plays and he plays, so that's good, and I can also have some break at that point. Okay, teenagers require less exercise, but that age is also the age where individuals are producing a bunch of testosterone, which is going to actually contribute in the overall health and overall capability to actually sustain exercise. While adults, full grown adults and in the 50s, like myself, we have less stamina. We need to exercise on a regular basis. I need to exercise on a regular basis. I don't always do that, but I need to. That's basically how much I'm going to say here. Let's move on to the next topic. Now, what are anabolic steroids? Now, when it comes to muscles and building up muscles, you hear about anabolic steroids. Anabolic steroids are groups of lipids, right, that are produced out of cholesterol, right? This groups of lipids, these groups of lipids produced out of cholesterol, Some of them plays the role of hormones, right? Including testosterone, estrogen, right? Now, testosterone particularly is very much used to increase protein production. And bunch of athletes actually are using testosterone to actually produce a bunch of muscles, to build a muscle mass, right? The most common side effects of using testosterone to build up your muscles is going to be high blood pressure, okay, jaundice, acne, and a greater chance of developing cancer. This can also lead to some conditions, including impotence in males and shrinking of testicles. When you look at people who are actually lifting weights for competition, this is typically what happens in this individual because they tend to abuse the use of steroids. Okay, anabolic steroids can cause some aggressiveness in some individuals and mood swing. If some of the people who have actually went through competing for Mr. or Mrs. Olympia, right? You are going to notice that a lot of the people who are competing at that level have problems to maintaining strong relationship in their household, right? I'm not going to give out names, but we know, what happens with those who are competing at that level. All right, so based on the risk, one can wonder, well, is it really worth, the risk to do this? Well, I'm going to tell you this, using anabolic steroids, it's not a good idea, right? It's not a good idea, but it's only an advice, but you do really what you deem good for you. All right. So, what are some common disorders associated with the muscular system? We have spasm. What are spasm? These are involuntary contraction of muscles, right? It's sudden, right? And these are going to usually cause pains. Okay. Convulsions, these are seizures, right? These are multiple spasms in a relatively short period of time, right? Cramps, these are going to be strong pains that are caused by big contraction of muscle that happen very often in legs. For instance, in your thigh, the muscles of your thigh can cramp, painful condition. Muscles of your foot too, right? You have the strain. The strain is going to be a stretching or a tearing of a muscle, while a sprain, it's going to be a twisting of a muscle, typically where there is a joint, right? You're going to have tendons that can suffer from that, ligaments, blood vessels, and nerves. Myalgia. Myalgia are basically situations where the muscles are itchy, and this is happening due to injury or an infection. Fibromyalgia. This is a chronic itchy muscle, right? We don't know exactly what is the root cause of fibromyalgia, but it happens in our community more often than we want to see it. And then we have muscle dystrophy. Muscle dystrophy, it's basically a group of genetic disorders that progressively leads to the loss of muscle use, right? There is one particular kind that is called the wasting disease, where actually we lose the ability to use our legs because our muscles cannot be properly innervated anymore. And yeah, we have myasthenia gravis. Myasthenia gravis, it's an autoimmune disorder that actually targets where our immune system is targeting acetylcholine receptors. You know that when acetylcholine is released, acetylcholine goes and bind on acetylcholine receptors. These receptors are sitting in the sarcolemma, right? In the sarcolemma. So as the acetylcholine receptors are inactivated or destroyed, there is no more binding site for acetylcholine, which means there is no transduction signal in the cell, and which means no calcium is going to be released, and no calcium means no contraction. Simple, right? So, other disorders is amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. Amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, it's also commonly known as the Lou Gehrig disease. This is a neurodegenerative disease by which the neurons lose the ability to cause contraction of the muscle in a voluntary manner, right? Then we have sarcoma. The sarcoma is a cancer that originate inside of the body, in the muscle, connective tissue, but it's deeply buried in the body. All right, and then finally, homeostasis and the muscular system. The muscular system contributes extensively on homeostasis. How so? The muscular system plays a very important role in movement. Movement is going to produce heat. Heat is very important for maintaining our body in the proper temperature, right? Muscles are going to be very important to push the blood around the body, right? You think of the cardiac muscle, right? The cardiac muscle pushes the blood around the body. And without that muscle pumping the blood around the body, forget about maintaining a proper pH, because the cardiovascular system plays a very important role in maintaining the pH, right? Maintaining the pressure, right? And moving a number of things, moving air in the lungs, moving air out of the lungs, right? Because we are bringing in oxygen when we are breathing in, right? That oxygen is going to play a very important role even in the production of heat in our system. But breathing out is also going to allow us to kick carbon dioxide out, which actually is important to maintain the proper pH inside of our system, right? Now, the cardiovascular system also works alongside with the urinary system, right? And works alongside with the skeletal system, because the skeletal system actually stores calcium. So does the muscular system, right? And calcium is going to be essential for strengthening the bones, right? You have the parathyroid hormones, you have you have calcitonin, that are both involved in controlling the amount of calcium, right? So now we are talking about the involvement of the endocrine system. So you see that the skeletal muscle system is, the skeletal system and the muscle system are actually, both involved in homeostasis here. So let me go to the last slide and let me check some of the things I have not mentioned. I told you about the urinary system, right? Working alongside with the muscular system, for and the skeletal system for calcium, right? You have for the endocrine system, we have the parathyroid hormone and calcitonin that regulate calcium level. You have the kidney, actually, that plays a very important role in vitamin D, vitamin D that activates actually the absorption of calcium in the digestive tract, right? What else do I need to say? Oh, calcium also plays a very important role in the nervous system, while the nervous system is sending impulses for the muscular system to contract. Okay, so let us conclude this chapter here and say thank you for your attention. If you have any question, feel free to reach out to me, and hopefully you do have some questions. Thank you for your attention. Bye now.